and welcome to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast. Each week we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe who are going to offer insights, inspiration and guidance to help practitioners unlock potential for learning in the early years. Hello and welcome back to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast. I am here with Anne-Marie Christian and we're talking all about safeguarding in the early years. And in this episode, we want to look a little bit more in depth at the role of that safeguarding coordinator, but also the sort of thing that safeguarding policy might include. So Anne-Marie, can you just give us an outline, first of all, of what a good policy looks like and where we find the information that needs to be in that policy document?
Okay, so we need to be aware of the legislation. We've got the national government, we've got local government. So the national government have given us guidance for safeguarding in our settings. There's what to do if you're worried about a child. There's information sharing and what to do, and also working together to safeguard children. So those are generic ones for any setting. And then there's one specific for schools, colleges, or maintained nurseries. So for colleagues outside of that sector, I'd encourage you to know about this document for good practice. And that's called Keeping Children Safe in Education. And it's for schools and colleges and maintained nurseries. So why I like this document, it's a legal framework and it's something where it covers all the requirements that we should have as a safeguarding setting. So for example, it's statutory guidance and also it encourages the whole team approach. It has 5 parts to it. Part 1 is all staff know their roles and responsibilities, what to do. Part 2 is about the management of safeguarding, which is about strategic safeguarding. Part 3 is about safer recruitment and what must be done. Managing allegations against staff, volunteers and supply staff is part 4. And part 5 is child and child harm. So I really would encourage people, if they're not familiar with keeping children safe in education, to go online and Google it. It's going to be changed on the 1st of September 2023. But also, we know in early years, we've got our other stuff around safeguarding in early year settings as well. So following that early years framework too. But the other bits are really good practice.
Yeah, and there's lots of stuff that's out there on the internet that can support you. I think partly that's just about filtering out the good stuff and making sure that you get things that people recommend. So it's articles you might find in magazines, publications that are reputable, and also asking around what other people in other settings use and have found to be useful. Because again, you don't want one of these documents that just sits on the shelf and gathers dust. This has got to be a policy document that is going to be part of what you do all the time. So it needs constant review, updating, training, that sort of thing.
And also, you must follow. So when I mention national and local, in your local authority, you must follow your local procedures. So you must quote the local authority in your safeguarding policy and how you respond in following the local authority procedures. That's really important. So across the country, we might have, some people might have county councils, different places, but you'd have the local authority children's social care. So in some places it might be called MASH, which is a multi-agency safeguarding hub, which is the front line of safeguarding reporting. Some places it might be a SPA, single point of access. For some places it might be the referral team. So you must quote what those are in your policy, including out of hours. So we know social care close at 5 o'clock. And for our settings, a lot of them close at 6 or 7. So we need to be mindful of after 5, what do we do? Yeah. And also reporting allegations against staff, same thing. So it's really important we embed the local procedures too.
And we have talked a lot previously in this podcast around the concerns you might have about parents and about children, but also it does happen that allegations are made against members of the team, and there has to be a process and a protocol that goes with that, because they can be difficult to manage, because obviously it's a member of your team. It might be somebody that you know particularly well. And again, you've got to be really balanced in the view that you take. And that's hard when it's somebody that you know. So policy documents like this with processes in will really help people to do that. But also there are people out there to support you in this process. You wouldn't be left alone doing it.
Absolutely. So again, in your policy, we should have various policies. And then you've got the safeguarding policy. So some people call it the child protection policy. Some people call it safeguarding policy. Think about an intimate care policy, how that's also another
Yeah.
safeguarding document. We've got our whistleblowing, policy, allegations against staff, and also our staff handbook about how we must conduct ourselves at all times. And it's important that the setting make it quite clear about the expectations we have on them in how they do that whilst in our setting. For children, also how we conduct ourselves towards our colleagues and also to parents.
Yeah, and again, that's something that's important that is revisited on a regular basis, because what we're talking about there is staff culture. And I suppose even if you're a childminder working on your own, there's still a culture of who you are and how you present yourself. But it's, especially within a team, and when that team can change, which often in childcare it does on a fairly regular basis, revisiting this as a core of who you are and what you do is really important.
Yes, and in a policy, what we should clearly have is what is the procedure in how do I activate safeguarding concern? So good practice would be at the start of the policy, you have the named people who are the safeguarding leads or your strategic safeguarding person too. So whether you've got a trustee, safeguarding trustee or safeguarding governor, the proprietor, it's really important there too. So you've got the
Yeah.
operational, the management and the strategic, and also the local authority contact. So most people use a policy when they want to use it too, as well as knowing it and being familiar with it. So what is the protocol and what do I do when, how, and why? So that all has
Yeah.
to be explained in your policy, including online. So people, how they conduct themselves online. And again, how you might want to report the setting. Again, if you've got concerns about the setting. So it's important, again, go back to the local authority. We have something called the LADO, the local authority designated officer. That would be the person that you report concerns to about the setting or any individual if you are unable to tell anyone in your setting. So the real kind of transparency around if you can't talk to this person, speak to that person rather
Yeah.
than no other option.
And I think this is when we're talking about safeguarding as a much, much broader issue. So safeguarding, yes, is about children in your care, but it's also about you. It's also about the space you inhabit. It's also about the community that come within that space. And again, what you don't want to be doing if you've got a concern is having to run to your document and look at it for the first time. You want to know how that process works and use that document for reference and support as opposed to a first protocol.
I was going to say it should be revised at least annual.
Yeah, because it's such a crucial document. And I suppose that leads us really nicely into thinking about the role of the kind of principal or primary safeguarding officer. So the person who's going to have responsibility for kind of the implementation and the updating of that document. I mean, it's not a role to be taken lightly, but it can be a role that is extremely rewarding. Why would I, if I'm listening to this, want to consider becoming a safeguarding officer?
Okay, so we used to call them child protection officers, and now since 2014, we call them designated safeguarding leads. And the government has been quite clear that over the years they strengthened that role where they have roles and responsibilities. So the safeguarding lead should have a very clear job description about their safeguarding role, and it should be quite explicit in their job description. Likewise, they should be a senior leader. So for keeping children safe in education, they're very clear that a school, college, or a Mente nursery must have an SLT, a senior leader member who is the safeguarding lead, because they have authority and status to make decisions on behalf of your setting when they go to meetings in social care or the
Yeah.
police. So they'll go to lots of strategy meetings, quite a lot of meetings where there's authority needed. So also they should, again, they attend 2 yearly training. So again, they should follow the local policy procedure of what does your local authority say training you must go on. So some local authorities say you can only go on their training. So some people have to do that. And if they want to go on another one, they can. Where some say you can go on any. So you must follow that procedure. And again, in the training, they cover things like roles and responsibilities, legislation and guidance, the national, local. Thresholds of child protection is key because you're the go-to person that people are going to speak to about escalating concerns. Also managing referrals, making referrals to social care, the police or any other agency, around safeguarding, multi-agency working, policy and practice, information sharing and confidentiality. So these are the key things that the safeguarding lead must do in raising the awareness and also ensuring that safeguarding is alive and ongoing in that golden thread. So new staff starting, they do the induction, how people are vetted appropriately about those checks and those references. Have they been appointed appropriately? Likewise, supply staff. How do we update the governors or the trustees about safeguarding and operational? How do we inform parents about how we keep their children safe? Do they know what our policies are about? Do they know that we teach their children safeguarding through learning and play? So all these things are really important, especially the prevent duty in England. So we know about the fundamental British values that we have in England. That is a requirement, again, in how we teach children, again, those various things, including, personal PSHE, RSHE, again, in that whole thing about teaching children about health, social health, relationships, etc. So there's something where we're teaching on 0 to 5 about, touch, play, consent, respect, boundaries, secrets, all these things are things that we have to teach children in order to keep themselves safe. So yes, the safeguarding needs got quite a lot to do with all of that.
Yeah, it's a really broad role, but it's a really important role, and they carry an awful lot of responsibility. But it can be an extremely fascinating role. I think from my experience, it can also be a really trying role for your emotional well-being. So I think it's really important that people who carry that level of responsibility also have opportunities to be able to, not to discuss necessarily what the content of what they are dealing with, but also talk about how it's making them feel. So I think if you are in that kind of role, it's important that you have somebody or something you can talk to confidentially about you and your mental health and well-being, because it can take quite a toll on the things that you see and hear. And also for me, and again, this is a purely personal experience, I used to experience quite a lot of frustration at how slowly sometimes the wheels move, especially when it's around local authority or wider government, and there might be a child or an adult who's vulnerable in need and something needs to be done, and actually process and policy means that it happens really slowly. That in itself, that just anxiety that you aren't making things happen as fast as you think it needs to, that takes a toll, alongside the things that you might be seeing and hearing about how some families and children are living, which can be quite distressing.
Absolutely. So we call it safeguarding supervision. So supervision is what DSLs now have if they want to. It's quite common now. And as a social work manager, I did safeguarding supervision with my social workers every 3 weeks, where we talk about going back to your point, the impact the job has on themselves as a human, their well-being. You're hearing lots of distressing stories about little children or children. And then your point about the system being slow. So there are processes in place that we have to go with. And you're absolutely right. They're not as immediate as we'd like them to be sometimes. So it's all around decision making. And you're absolutely right. Sometimes, you rang social care, the social worker hasn't responded. You're waiting for hours to get a reply. There's lots of things. So safeguarding supervision is good. And also, over the last few years, local authorities have introduced designated safeguarding lead network meetings. So as a local authority, find out if they have one, and then join it. So a lot of them are by Zoom now, obviously, because what we're doing at the moment. But it's really useful where they talk about local themes, local resources, and it's really helpful to get familiar with colleagues in different settings, but also in children's social care.
And I think also it's really good to find out what those colleagues are doing with their settings, because one of the really positive things about the job, and there are some, or the role, is that you can have a really well-informed setting where you've got staff who are intuitive and reflective, and there's clear policy in place. You feel like your parents are well supported, they're well informed, and you will never, none of us can ever 100% guarantee that we can safeguard the well-being of everybody within our kind of radar 100% of the time. But what you can do is know that you are doing the best job that you can do to make everybody in your team as aware as they can possibly be.
Absolutely. And another thing that's really, really important is the safeguarding lead has to have fantastic record keeping skills. Likewise, there has to be evidence of everything that they've done, because in any decision you've made, you could be called to court, or you might go to an official strategy meeting where you need to share your record and your decision making. So it's really important that the training you have equips you to know how to feel confident in making a decision about safeguarding. And in the guidance, they've got a whole section in Keeping Children Safe in Annex C about the role of the DSL. And there's different paragraphs for managing referrals, information sharing, lots of things. So if you're not familiar with the role of the safeguarding lead, I really would encourage you to familiarise yourself with that particular document, Keeping Children Safe in Education. And at the back, you've got various annexes where they've got one on that. It will definitely fill in those gaps because, again, if it does go to court, or like with me in my case reviews, your notes will go forward about how we, supported that family at the time. And again, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. We know that's kind of what people say, and that's so true in safeguarding. So the referral that came to you, you've got a record of what the person's sharing. You've now made a decision. You've recorded it. You've rang the parent if it was okay on that case, or you rang social care. That has to be recorded. Spoke to John Smith, the duty social worker, explained the above. He instructed me to do the following. Really important that we understand that.
Yeah, the due process is in place. Absolutely. So I think it's not a role you take lightly, but it's a role that can be invaluable. And it's something I think you've got to be passionate about, because not only will it massively enrich your professional experience and expertise, it also can take a toll on you personally and emotionally. But that's probably because you're so invested in the role in the first place.
And so I think, forget, at the end of the day, I find it quite satisfying too, because they're part of that force of keeping child safer. Does that make sense? So even though, like you said, it does sound daunting, the outcome is the child is safer for what you've done. Yeah. Or we've got more information now about that family environment that later on might help us in another decision. So always think about the positives of a child who's now in a better place, rather than actually, I said something about a family that I felt uncomfortable about. So that's more about the family rather about child. We must remain child-centred and child-focused in our work. We must. Yeah. The welfare of the child is paramount, and that is a big part of the Children's Act 1989 in England. And similar in the world internationally about UNICEF, the rights of the child. Children, we put them first.
So it's a real opportunity to make a difference, which I think is a lovely way to leave this episode. So once again, Anne-Marie, great pearls of wisdom and insight. It's been fascinating to talk to you. And I look forward to talking to you in our fourth and final episode, which is just going to be kind of a roundup on all the things we've talked about and any other bits of information that you want to get across to us in the short time that we've got. So thanks again, Anne-Marie.
Thank you.
And I'd like to say a huge thank you to our guest, Anne-Marie, for joining us and providing such valuable insights. You've been listening to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Alistair Bryce-Clegg, and Anne-Marie Christian. And if you've been inspired by our conversation today, don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and access exclusive follow-up content, including ideas for your setting and links to loads of relevant resources.